Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. I'm very pleased to have Jim Sisco on. He's from Fairfax, Virginia. He's been in a 3.5 year battle with Fairfax County Circuit Court, and he has gone from Judge Mann now to Judge Bernhard. And this is a big mess because they're putting sanctions on him. I welcome you, Jim Sisco, to the podcast. I know you've been on before, but welcome again.
Yeah, Marianne, I enjoy being on your podcast, but I hate being on your podcast
Oh
because
no, I know.
being on your podcast means that I am continued to be in the quagmire of the family court system, and that it's my ability to expose the kind of the abuses that are going on. And I've learned a lot over the past 6 months, and I really want to share this latest event with you and your audience to really demonstrate, how the family court system is really, set up in a way to protect itself. And once you're behind the eight ball like I am, there's really no way to get out.
Right, you're absolutely right. For any parent, there's no way once they get you behind there and they're threatening you with sanctions and gag orders, even if it's verbal abuse on the parent.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this latest event, which I, shared a lot of the information with you, I actually sent the draft contempt order that Judge Bernhard wrote with you, and that's what I want to talk about today. And my hope is, number one, that this draft does not become a permanent order. Number two, that it exposes Judge Bernhard's pattern of behavior, and number three, creates more awareness for the legislative reforms that, with the help of Robert Garza, we introduced to legislators in Virginia, and hopefully have the three-strike rule and the time lost rule created into legislation in Virginia.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You know, your ex has also interfered in custodial interference via the Skype calls as well. I don't think he's even actually looking at that whole process.
In this latest motion to show cause, it was my ex-wife. She took me back to court for the fourth time, claiming that I didn't pay unreimbursed medical expenses, that I had owed previous monies from a previous contempt order, and that I continue to violate the custody and visitation agreement by disparaging her and using third parties to influence her. And it had nothing to do with child custody, visitation, or anything. And the part that was disturbing is that Judge Bernhard took it upon himself to make recommendations for custody and visitation, which was outside of the scope of the motion to show cause. He actually wrote in his contempt order that he believes that supervised visitation should occur after a period of 6 months, and that supervised visitation should occur or should be paid by me. That is outside of the scope of the motion to show cause, number one. Number two, it's written in a way that's going to influence a future custody and visitation hearing, because the judge will read that and maybe take that into account when making his determination. And there's no justification. But what happened also in the hearing, in the trial, is very disturbing. If I were some deranged, unhinged, individual with felonies or arrests or convictions, alcohol use or drug use or abuse to the children in any way, I could see how these motions or how these orders could be written. But as we discussed in my previous podcast, no abuse, no neglect, no anything that would preclude me from being a part of my children's lives. And for 3.5 years, I've been fighting to do that out of the order that Judge Mann wrote. But I'd like to really talk about this recent motion to show cause and how it really exemplifies the judicial authority, abuse, and the hubris and almost the arrogance with these judges in writing their rulings, and how they formulate their rulings based on their worldview and based upon the hubris they have of being a judge. And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at the word judge, to judge a person, And these judges sit there on the stand and hear a tiny bit of evidence and then make a judgment that really doesn't capture contextually the facts of the case.
It's all hearsay. They look at the hearsay and they run with it.
Yeah, in this latest motion, we had the therapist who was treating my children for almost a year and a half, Dr. Mary Lindell. She testified that she was reviewing Skype calls, charging $195 to review Skype calls. Those Skype calls were not reimbursable through TRICARE or through my ex-wife's service insurance provider, and that they weren't even categorized as medical expenses or legitimate therapy. And then my ex-wife and her claim that they were part of the therapy process for my children. In the entire time that she was treating my children, she never once sent me an email or an update or a review of a Skype call. I asked her numerous times to talk about or provide me insights into the Skype calls, how to improve them, different things to talk about, what issues or topics to avoid. And I never received one email. However, when presented with that evidence to Judge Bernhard, he still ruled that those were legitimate medical expenses and that I was responsible for payment of those. That's just one example of several of how he really abused his judicial authority and did not rule on the facts of the case.
Correct. And when did he become an insurance provider? Know-it-all.
Well, here's an astounding fact. So my lawyer presented evidence that my ex-wife did not hit certain milestones in the marital separation agreement. In that agreement, she has a certain amount of days to provide me with the information for the billing, the payments, and the services from the insurance provider. In the entire time of almost 3 years, she would send me a receipt or she would send me an EOB, and she would not send me any payment information. And then she would ask me for 65% of the unreimbursed medical expenses. So when I had a lawyer, Jim Bacon, he told me, just stop making the payments because she's not providing you with the information that's required under the marital separation agreement. And in the actual hearing with Judge Bernhard, he figured it out and he said to my attorney, so Ms. Holtzman has not hit any of these milestones. She has not triggered the things that would allow Mr. Sisco to make payment. So therefore, Mr. Sisco, under the terms of the marital and separation agreement, is not obligated to make any of these payments. Is that correct? And my lawyer didn't answer him. And I was sitting on the stand at the time and I'm saying, yes, say yes. And he's like, no, don't say anything. And then the judge said, literally, well, you don't have to answer that right now. We'll get back to it. Disturbing part is then he writes in the order, knowing that my ex-wife had not triggered any of the milestones for payment and not provided the requisite information. And he still ruled that, number one, the Skype call reviews were legitimate medical expenses. And number two, that I was responsible for $9,000 in unreimbursed medical expenses that my ex-wife claimed that I hadn't paid, when I had an overpayment of $21,000 that she never credited. So once again, the judge having information, facts that I had overpayments, number one. Number two, that my ex-wife had not reached the milestones that were required within the marital separation agreement, and still made the judgment in the draft contempt order that I was responsible for 65% of the unreimbursed medical expenses, an amount of like $5,000.
So he's not looking at the past information from Judge Mann.
So that was an interesting kind of situation, because in the beginning of the trial, he literally said, I am not going to allow the court's previous decision to influence my ruling. And I really had a glimmer of hope. I was like, wow, this is great. He's not going to take Judge Mann's ruling, which everybody knows was egregious,
Mhm.
and he's going to have a clean slate. And he even said that he needs to find a new path forward, one that will build trust between the individuals in the best interest of the children. And that really provided me like some hope. I really felt good. And what happened was exactly opposite to what he said. He did not provide. So when my attorney filed our draft motion, he put in there certain stipulations, like we would agree to X, we would agree to Y, we would do all of these things, trying to have a balanced approach. That I would pay $20,000 for the previous contempt order, and that I would take that $20,000 and I would split it equally into thirds, and I would deposit it into the children's trusts.
Mhm.
So instead of paying money to lawyers for fees, that it was an investment in my children's future.
Mhm.
Instead, the judge ignored 90% of my lawyer's recommendations for the contempt order and instead decided to take the opposing counsel's recommendations, which one of the recommendations was incarceration for 5 months and 1 day, payments of $67,000 of their legal fees, payments of $20,000 for previous contempt orders, payments for court recorder fees at like
Mhm.
$1,000 a day. So it was all about the money.
Right.
And he didn't take into account any of the suggestions from my lawyer. So he basically took the contempt order, modified it based upon the opposing counsel's recommendations to include a provision in there where I would be incarcerated for 90 days if I didn't make payment of almost $100,000 by February 28th, which for me goes against everything that the court is supposed to be about. Finding a clear path forward, finding a way to build trust between the parties, everything working in the best interest.
Mhm.
Instead, the draft order was written in a way where it was punitive, and it basically was another way of extorting money. And his basis for that decision was that I have the means or the resources to make the payment, number one. And number two, that it was mistakenly put into the transcript that I had not made any legal payments, that my lawyer was operating pro bono. However, it was a misunderstanding where I hadn't made any recent payments, that I had paid $8,500, and that after the trial was over, I received a invoice for $31,000 from my lawyer. So adding the 31,000 onto the 100,000, and now having my lawyer charge me $5,500 to appeal the case, to file motions, to put a
Mhm.
motion to stay in, is all about the money. And here's the worst part. Christmas, I had a 15-minute Skype call with my children where they were asking to see me, telling me how much they miss me. And I asked my ex-wife if I could have just some in-person visitation to exchange gifts, to give them their cards, which, by the way, she only gave me approval to allow me to send them cards on Tuesday. So I couldn't get them to them. Here's their cards still, and I
Oh.
couldn't mail them. And so when we talk about this latest motion, and it's the fourth motion my ex-wife has filed against me in about 3 years. This is nothing. This has nothing to do with the children. It has nothing to do with their best interests. It has everything to do with maintaining control, authority, extorting money, and continual legal harassment. And you've seen it,
Yep.
and I'm not going to allow myself to continue to be abused by the judicial system, by Judge Mann and his decision, by Judge Bernhard and his decision. And it's time for me to use my voice. And I'm not here to uh, whine and complain. I'm here to expose individuals, expose their behavior, and
Mhm.
also talk about the things that I'm trying to do proactively, like joining groups and reforming the legislation by Robert Garza, submitting it to legislators, and exposing Judge Bernhard, who has a history of this behavior. He actually has a appeal against him that was ruled for behavior that was similar to his ruling that he made in my case. So there is a history of this
Mhm.
behavior by Judge Bernhard, who, by the way, is leaving the circuit court on December 31st and moving to the appellate court.
Ugh.
So his decision and the timing of this is no coincidence in that he submitted the draft motion the day before Christmas to
Ugh.
my lawyer and gave us till today to provide our response. And then by the 31st of December, he'll put out his final order. And that is not a coincidence. That is by design. And
Mhm.
there's other really disturbing part of this that needs to be addressed. During the trial, Judge Bernhard, on his own, introduced to the lawyers that this case had some very significant or serious allegations and information, and that he recommended that the case be sealed so that the children couldn't be exposed to this information until they're 18. He then went to opposing counsel and he went to my lawyer and asked if we were in agreement. And they both, without hesitation, said yes. On the stand, I expressed my concern and didn't understand the necessity for sealing the case, number one. And number two, how it was going to impact the children or have an adverse effect on them in any way whatsoever. I never consented to it. And then I expressed to my lawyer that I would not agree to it. And my lawyer, he said that that I had already agreed to it, that we had talked about this, and that he moved forward with consenting to the case being sealed. So this was not done to protect children. This sealing of the case was done to protect Judge Bernhard and his ruling. And there were several parts of the trial that exposed his hubris or arrogance or in ways that he probably doesn't want that getting out. And one of those examples was when I was on the stand testifying. I mentioned, and I don't pull the vet card out like I'm a 23-year veteran with 4 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't ever leverage that to advantage myself. I never have. But it came out that I was in the Marine Corps. And the judge looked at me and said, Mr. Sisco, do you believe that your behavior represents the behavior of a Marine? Don't you believe that Marines act with integrity? Do you believe your behavior reflects integrity? And as you know, as you're sitting on the stand and you don't want to argue with the judge and you don't want to piss the judge off, but you can't even protect yourself, because if in retrospect, in hindsight, I would have said, Your Honor, don't ever question my integrity.
Mhm.
You do not know anything about me. And you have the audacity to say that my actions and behavior as a father trying to be a part of my children's lives are not held to the standards of being a Marine or don't reflect integrity. And there were other parts of the trial that I understand that he probably does not want being put out and doesn't want on public record because they're embarrassing. Making recommendations that I should apologize to my children. When did Judge Bernhard become a child therapist? When did he become a clinical psychologist? And this is what I'm talking about when judges overstep their boundaries. I'm a judge. I know more than you. I can rule on things because I've been empowered. And this is part of the problem within the family court system and things that you've experienced and other people have spoken about on your podcast and you're well aware of.
Right. Another thing I found very concerning in this order was um, they want these court reporter fees of $3,980, and they want you to pay the sum directly to the Daughtry law firm. Now, what scares me about that is, say you pay those fees, then they're going to turn around, the court reporter is going to turn around saying, I never got paid. And then you're going to say, well, I paid the law firm as ordered. And it's going to come back and you still owe this $3,900.
Well, not only that, but if you look at also the way the order was written, and my ex-wife testified on the stand that she had incurred significant legal fees and was paying almost $20,000 a month. She had paid $20,000 a month. And then the way the order is written, I have to pay $67,000 to the Daughtry law firm. But if my wife had, our ex-wife had already made these payments, it's double dipping. And this
Yes.
is another pattern of unethical behavior by Joe Menzie and the Daughtry law firm. I had emailed the partners of the Daughtry law firm on several occasions, and I had also submitted complaints to the Virginia Bar Association on Mr. Menzie's inappropriate behavior, his actions, and his billing. And each time the Virginia State Bar came back and they would not investigate or would not move forward. I also introduced this information to the partners of the law firm so they could be held accountable and they would understand that as lawyers in Virginia, they have a right, an ethical right to report unethical behavior on any attorney, including partners or attorneys are in their firm.
Right.
So at the end of the day, the Daughtry law firm is complicit with this in their actions and behavior of not acting upon Mr. Menzie's inappropriate behavior. And this has really gotten to a point where it is personal between Mr. Menzie and I. During cross-examination, he started actually yelling at me where my lawyer had to say, okay, Mr. Menzie, let's keep this civil. Unfortunately for me, I maintained my composure. And when he was yelling at me, do you think these voicemails are vile? And I just literally said, no, I do not believe they are. And, you know, this goes again to show just how the family court is just the Wild West. It's a circus. And I wish they were held more in a manner of criminal proceedings. And there's weight of evidence and there's the rules. And because 90% of the evidence in this latest motion to show cause was hearsay. My ex-wife's testimony, the therapist's testimony, the material facts in the case, which were not evidentially correct, presented by my ex-wife and her attorney, a spreadsheet with no material foundation or evidence. It was just, I'm going to put some numbers on a spreadsheet, introduce it as evidence, and now that becomes fact. Where we spent 30 to 40 hours doing our due diligence in identifying the dates of the receipts, the payment methods, reimbursement, everything in a detailed spreadsheet that when introduced was just basically ignored by Judge Bernhard. And they just focused on this random spreadsheet that had a bunch of figures on it and then said, well, you owe me $9,000. I mean, that for me is inconceivable. It's almost as bad as making a false allegation of abuse or neglect. But that's the family court system.
Yes, they'll run on a false narrative. They do it all the time.
Yeah, and you know, it's just frustrating to see this happen and being a part of it and having hardly any recourse. I mean, what's my recourse now? So if this judge signs the order as is, I have to pay almost $100,000 by February 28th or be incarcerated for 90 days, limiting, and you've read in the order where the judge is telling me that I am no longer allowed to be on social media. I have to take down my social media posts, and then I have to basically, you know, have a gag order. And I can't do this any longer. I refuse to allow a judge who has never met me, spoke to me outside of a courtroom, knows nothing about me, make a determination based upon his limited knowledge and understanding or the evidence that was presented, and will have negative consequences not only for me but for my children. Let's take $100,000 from this person
Right.
that can be spent for vacations or school or anything, and give it to a crooked law firm
Right.
and an unethical lawyer who has a pattern of this. And when I talk about Mr. Menzie, it's not out of malice or hate or whatever. He has several complaints, judicial bar complaints against him, which I found out in the past couple of months, and including being served a motion for his actions. So this is not a single incident. There's a pattern of this individual's behavior, who was at a very prominent law firm in Fairfax, Livesay and Myers, which is the family court law firm that everybody goes to, and everybody wants to make a name for themselves as a lawyer and join there and then become a partner and then branch out on your own. And he got fired from Livesay Meyer because of my interaction with the partners at Livesay. I continued to expose his behavior, and finally they had enough of it. And then he went to the Doughty Law Firm, a very small law firm in Manassas, Virginia, where he basically was a diversity hire. So once again, I have to bring this to the attention, and using your platform enables me to do that. But as I also shared with you, I wrote an op-ed that discusses Judge Bernhard's case. And my goal is to have this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal or the Fairfax Times and bring attention to this, because the only way that Judge Bernhard is going to change his actions and behavior is when people recognize what he's doing and hold him accountable.
Definitely, such as exposing the abuse of judicial power, Judge Bernhard's recent ruling on family law matters, judicial overreach in action, sealing the case, protecting the children, or silencing the public. As far as lack of empathy and misuse of authority, and I'm going to add on to that, Judge Bernhard must not be aware of the ACEs scores, because if he incarcerates you, do you know what that's going to do to your children? That's on the ACEs scores. He better look that up. And also, your First Amendment rights. Apparently, he doesn't think much of the Constitution either. Also, here, systemic failures demand accountability. Judge Bernhard's ruling is not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a systemic issues within the family court system. The judges wield immense power with little oversight, leading to decisions that often reflect personal biases rather than the best interests of families. Now, I know you're also calling for reform. I'm calling for family court to be abolished, because I don't think we can reform this corruption. I think it's out of hand. It's been out of hand for decades. And again, with the ACEs scores, parents being incarcerated because they either can't pay a sum which was dreamed up by Attorney Menzies and Judge Bernhard. I think this is criminal to do to your children.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I entered that trial and Judge Bernhard, said to the court, said to myself, that the current situation was not tenable, that it was not acting in the best interest of the children. It created a toxic environment where neither party could trust, and that he literally stated that there has to be another way, that he would try to find a path forward, a new path forward. Like I said, that gave me hope. And then he issued an order that was punitive, that did nothing to create a more harmonious environment or create communication or dialogue between the parties. It basically reinforced Judge Mann's order and the previous contempt orders, and further, created complications for me to be reunited with my children through financial, and I shared with you and I shared with other people that this has had a huge impact on me personally, professionally, financially. And I shared with you that I suffered a stroke on Veterans Day last year, and that I sought mental health treatment through a VA service provider due to the stress and anxiety of being removed from my children's lives, not having access to them. Nowhere in the order did he ever mention anything about the physical, psychological, or financial strains, or I would say abuse that I've been subjected to. So there was no empathy or compassion by him, no even recognition that, hey, maybe Mr. Sisco isn't in contempt because he never willingly or knowingly violated the court order, that he had made several attempts over the period of years to negotiate settlements with the opposing counsel, with his ex-wife. He suffered a stroke, and the opposing counsel puts in there one email that he sends to me saying that I was late on my payments. And that is showing contempt. And this was only a couple weeks after I had suffered my stroke, or I actually had, I was receiving mental health treatment at Fort Belvoir. So I'm not going to sit here and allow this to continue. I'm not going to allow Judge Bernhard to continue to, use the authority of the court to punish me, and I can't allow him and his actions, his behavior, not to be exposed.
They need to be exposed. The public needs to be warned. And I'm so glad I met you because of what you went through. It's kind of very similar to what I went through and other parents are going through. And these Skype calls I also found very disturbing. How she would swing the laptop around and then just stare at you with this flat affect, and then allegedly turn off the Skype calls. Do you want to tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so the Skype calls have been just very difficult in the fact that she controls them. In other words, she stands right behind the computer and just waits for an opportunity to end the call. And that has evolved over time. In the beginning, like you said, she would turn the computer towards her, and sometimes she would say something like, "Oh no, you're not going to talk about that. Goodbye," and hang up the computer. And after several complaints, maybe her lawyer said, "Hey, that's probably not a good idea." So then she changed her method, where she would just turn the computer and then hang up. Then she would just put her finger over the camera and continue recording, or then she would shut the Skype laptop down but continue recording the audio file. So in one of the audio files that they presented as evidence, she shuts the computer so you can hear the call end. The computer shuts, and I say a very disturbing thing, as the court says. I call her the C word, and I'd never intentionally said it in front of the children. And in the motion, it says that I am not allowed to disparage mother in earshot of the children. So they present that as evidence. And I explain that her behavior, that she has shut the Skype calls. You can hear in the audio file, the Skype call is shut. And then you hear me saying that word, I call her that word. And then they end the Skype call.
Well, that's called, go ahead.
Entrapment.
Right. And that's baiting. I was told by an attorney that you can't do that because that's baiting. Baiting.
And then what happens is they present that as evidence, and the judge says, "My God, Mr. Sisco, that word, that phrase, that term you used."
Oh, like he hasn't used it.
Yeah. And I could hear the children gasping in the background. And it was so you can't hear the children say anything. All you can hear is because they cut the audio file. Right. Maybe the children were going, "Mom, why did you turn the computer off?"
Right.
"Mom, what?" You have no idea what was said. And then they're like, and then he has the audacity to say, "Mr. Sisco, you owe the children an apology for what you said." And once again, the facts get distorted or perverted to fit the worldview or the narrative that judge wanted to present.
I agree. I can relate totally with your case.
And the Skype calls continue to be a problem. She unilaterally ends Skype calls. She prevented 4 Skype calls from happening, which is a contempt issue. And then when I bring these things up, that I called the police, that I made CPS complaints, and then I filed an order of contempt against her for not even allowing 4 Skype calls, I'm harassing her.
Well,
Mr. Sisco, why did you have the police come and do a welfare check? Well, I was concerned because she continues to end the Skype calls. Well, isn't that harassing? No, it's being a concerned parent, but the narrative changed. The
mhm.
narrative was I'm the bad guy and that I'm making these complaints and going down to the district attorney's office, filing a complaint for contempt because I can't talk to my children, but yet I'm the bad guy.
Well, there you go. That's that DARVO, DARVO, which is the acronym for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. So they flip it on you. It was
Yep.
done to me as well.
Yeah, and like I said, for 3.5 years I've been dealing with this, and at the end of the day, I've seen my relationship with my children evolve, and I truly believe that the kids are 14 and 12. They'll be 15 in February,
Mhm.
and I'm going to file a motion to modify custody and visitation, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and they're going to testify. They're going to be witnesses on the stand, and my ex-wife lied on the stand, perjured herself
Mhm.
in front of the judge. And she said that my youngest daughter doesn't want to have a relationship with me and that she's afraid of me. And that after the Skype calls, she has to sleep in bed with my ex wife because she can't go to sleep. This is the same 12-year-old who's on TikTok wearing filters and makeup, singing explicit content on songs. And then she says that my son doesn't want to talk to me because all I do is berate him, and that I'm only proud of my oldest daughter, and that they all know that. And I sat there in my Skype calls and addressed this previous times that I love them all the same, that they're
Mhm.
all
I
good.
heard you, definitely.
And she has the audacity to say that. And the judge looks at me like, oh my God, Mr. Sisco, you're such an evil man. And he looks at, if you look at all of the hours of Skype calls, we're talking about over 100 hours of recorded Skype calls, more than that. Over, like, if I do the quick math, like 400 hours. Opposing counsel presents 15 minutes of over a couple hundred hours. And then the judge makes a ruling based upon that. And those 15 minutes that I presented were the most egregious. The one that really upset me the most as a parent. And I learned from the therapist and I learned from child alienation information that you always want your children to know that no matter what happens, that you love them.
Mhm.
And part of that, when I talk to them, I always say, hey, I love you, I miss you. And there's a couple of times when I'm down and I'm depressed, and I'll ask them, I'm like, don't you guys miss me? Don't you love me?
Mhm.
And they're like, yeah, Dad, we do miss you. We love you. Because that's good to hear as a parent.
Mhm.
And the judge has the audacity to say that I'm seeking validation from my children.
No, that's called having a relationship with your children, and the verbiage goes both ways. These aren't 4-year-olds. If they were 4-year-olds, I would say, don't tell them you don't miss them because that might bother them. But these are teens. These aren't China dolls.
Yeah. And for a judge to say, Mr. Cisco, you're seeking validation from your children, asking them to tell them or tell you they love you. I'm like, are you insane?
Oh my
And
God.
I don't know if Judge Bernhard has children or he's a parent, but he has no idea. Let me take your child from you for 3.5 years, and sure, you're going to be upset and mad and angry and go through a full spectrum of emotions. And part of that is wanting to be validated as a father. Hey, kids, I love you. I miss you. I want to be a part of your life. You know, hearing from your children, yeah, Dad, we miss you, which is happening more. And like I said, this evolution of my relationship with my children continues. And part of that is I see my children being more expressive, being more communicative with their feelings. And I think this is really pissing off my ex-wife because in the last Skype call, my daughter, Tabitha, said, "Hey, Dad, you know, be careful. We don't want you to get hung up on." I mean, how is my 14-year-old daughter saying, "Hey, we want to talk to you. Mom's going to hang up the phone. We don't want that to happen." I mean, the tide's changing, and
That
I
speaks
do,
volumes.
yeah, you know, so I can't wait to have the opportunity to go to court and present all of this information. And I don't care if it takes 5 days and we have to watch 100 hours of Skype calls. I will have my time. And it will, because the testimony of my ex wife is on the record, it will show that she perjured herself. And when I have the kids testify to refute her claims, this is when I ask, I want 100% physical custody and 50-50 legal custody because she has proven to be an unfit parent. 3.5 years and not allowed one single minute of in-person visitation is absurd. It shows a total lack of empathy towards the children. And it shows and it proves to me what I know to be true, that my ex-wife cannot be alone. She has no friends, no infrastructure except for her mother and father, and that she will destroy herself if the kids come back into my life.
Mhm. Well, and
I don't want
also,
that.
yeah, the things your ex was saying on the stand were the exact same thing my ex was saying on the stand. So this must be some type of playbook.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd when you look at this. Like when people look at my case objectively, the first thing that comes to mind if they read Judge Mann's order is, what did this guy do? Was he a pedophile? I mean, did he just like beat these kids continually? And then they see that there's no expert witnesses, no expert testimony, no even allegations of abuse and neglect. And then they find out about Judge Mann's history and his own personal struggles. And then my wife's decision to hire the therapist who treated Judge Mann. And then the contempt orders by
Yeah,
Judge
that's right.
Askarati. And then you see this snowball effect and this perpetuation of a ruling that should have never happened. And nobody wants to hold Judge Mann accountable because they feel bad for him. And then the perpetuation of these orders by Judge Oblon, by Judge Askarati, by Judge Bernhard now. And it's this system. And as an individual, I am now having to fight not only Judge Mann's ruling, Judge Oblon's ruling, Judge Askarati's ruling, who was the judge for the Johnny Depp trial,
Hmm.
who wanted her 5 minutes of fame, but behind the scenes, when you ask attorneys about her, she has one of the worst reputations in the system. And and this is for me as a Marine, as somebody who's been in combat, I'm not gonna not fight anymore. That they've silenced me from my TikTok account for the past 8 months or 6 months, and I'm using this. I'm going to use my voice, and I'm going to, you know, use my platform to expose these individuals. And I would love to do a 30-minute podcast with you on Judge Askarati and her ruling, where I sent her an email, and I can share the email with you and your audience, where I said, I do not want to be held in contempt of court. Here is my draft motion for reconsideration. Here's my motion for this. And it was ignored. I went to court. She said, Mr. Menzie, did Mr. Sisco make his payment? And he said, no. And he goes, you're in contempt of court. Bailiff, arrest this man. And I said, I have payment today. I can make payment right now. She goes, I don't care. You're going to jail. So, like I said,
Apparently, she's not aware of the ACEs scores either. Oh, that's in the best interest of the children. Let's keep going.
so I was incarcerated for 5 days, which was no big deal. I mean, I was in the Marine Corps. I was in Special Forces. I did tours in Afghanistan, Iraq. And what the disturbing part of that was, I made the payment that Friday. So this court hearing was on Friday. They arrested me and incarcerated me around 2 o'clock. The cool part was the bailiffs and the guys working in the correctional facility
Okay.
were cool. They were like, I was like, listen, man, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a 23-year vet and I've got 4 combat tours. I'm not looking for any preferential treatment, but do not screw with me because
Mm-hmm.
you will not like how this turns out.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like all cool. They allowed me to get out of the holding cell, go into my evidence bag, which was sealed, open it up, write the check for $65,000 that Lindsay was extorting from me,
Mm-hmm.
give that check to my girlfriend at the time, where she came to the correctional facility, and they allowed her to receive this all behind the scenes, not allowed. She took the payment directly to the law firm on Friday before 4 o'clock, received a receipt for payment, brought it back to the court and the district attorney's office, and they kept me in jail for 5 days, knowing that I had made payment, just to teach me a lesson.
Sickening. That's disgusting.
Yeah. And then, the funny part was my financial advisor sent the district attorney an email and showing where on his screen capture the payment was made, and they still wouldn't let me out. The Doughty law, well, that at that point it was still Livesay and Myers.
Mm-hmm.
Livesay and Myers had to authenticate payment, and Joe Menzie on Friday knew I made payment, and he kept me in jail for 4 days and didn't authenticate until Wednesday. I got out like on a Wednesday.
And this is something that contributed to your stroke as well, because you
Yeah,
have an ACEs score as well.
yeah. I mean, all of this is part of that. And then I could go into Judge Oblong's order, where I checked myself into a mental health facility for treatment. On a Friday, and I knew that I had to be in court on Monday. I had my physician send the court a letter and an email saying that I was being treated at a mental health facility on Fort Belvoir. The Judge Oblong, who ruled previously against me in a motion to show cause, demanded that I get on the phone when the trial started at 10 a.m. on Monday. He actually told me at 8:30 in the morning, when I called into calendar control to make sure that they knew that I was being treated in a mental health facility, Mr. Sisco, you will keep this line open and I will call you when the trial starts. I mean, how does that happen? The court knows that I'm being treated for a mental health issue as a result of this litigation, and then demands that I keep a line open so he can call me when the trial starts. And then the opposing counsel starts interrogating me and asking me questions about my treatment. And I literally said, Your Honor, I'm not sure, but this is a HIPAA violation,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to answer this. And the judge would not rule on that. And actually, they made me and my lawyer file an motion where it was a violation of HIPAA privacy under my medical treatment. And once again, if you look at my case and how disturbing it is, and you look at everything that I've done, spent almost $400,000 in 3.5 years, been incarcerated for 5 days, had a stroke, mental health issues, and now one more time have to pay $100,000, pay court fees, unreimbursed medical expenses, and being told that I can no longer use my First Amendment, that I'm supposed to not be on social media, that I have to, if I have an opportunity to be reunited with my children, pay uh, for a therapist or a counselor to watch me with my children and supervise visitation. And it's absurd. And I'm not going to allow it to continue.
Mhm.
And, that's why, like I said, I can't just complain about it. I have to take action. And using your platform and submitting legislation and
Mhm.
exposing Judge Bernhard, exposing Judge Azarkati, exposing Judge Oblon. Yeah, you know what? It's a little cabal of judges. And
Mhm.
when I go for my motion to modify custody and visitation, all these judges are going to be, they know each other and they talk about their cases and they're going to be like, yeah, we're going to hammer this guy again.
Yeah.
I said, go ahead. You're only hurting my kids. You're not
Mhm.
hurting me any longer because I've become more resilient. I've become stronger. And at the end of the day, I'm going to expose your actions and behavior.
Mhm.
So this is my only recourse. And hopefully there's an organization out there like the NAACP or some like parents' right group that files a civil lawsuit or a class action lawsuit because I'm not alone. I
Mm-mm.
have joined a group called Virginia Parents United.
Mhm.
And I have met, as you know, someone who is also in your book
Yes.
who is subjected to the similar things as myself. I have met a group of husbands and wives who in Virginia who have and are experience similar plights of these judges and lawyers. Joe Menzie complaints, Virginia bar complaints by 7 different people shows a pattern with
Right.
no action taken. Complaints against Judge Bernhard by other individuals, complaints against Judge Mann by other individuals. So this is not me complaining and whining and saying, woe is me. This is me now exposing these individuals for their actions and behavior, which is contemptuous.
Right. Right. And you're speaking of Natalia Dalton, who is in this book along with you. And I mean, what she's being put through as well is just disgusting.
Yeah,
Ah,
it's criminal. And, you know, and for me, I can't allow it to continue for what I've been through. Um, you know, it may be a testament to my character, my resilience, but I could have easily gone to drugs or alcohol or,
mhm.
off myself or, but I chose a different path. And the
Mhm.
path that I'm choosing is one that I need to advocate and I need to bring awareness and attention and hold people accountable. And unfortunately, the family courts have created a system where accountability is not an option.
Mhm.
And whether or not, and I'm familiar with the tie and what they're doing and some of their actions, trying to create civil suits and trying to go after individuals and judges and I'm filing my own motion for sanctions against Joe Menzie, where I'm
Good.
hopefully going to recoup, 80 or $100,000 of the billing that he has done. But at the end of the day, it's still the legal system that protects these individuals, and
Mhm.
the first time a judge is held accountable or a lawyer is held accountable, it'll send a message. But unfortunately, the message that has been sent is the wrong files. But that's just a different story.
Mhm. Well, I'm so glad you spoke out. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm sure that this will be used against me, but I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to get this out before any motion was signed and sealed, and it would preclude me from being able to tell my story. And I'm
Mhm.
sure that Judge Bernhard doesn't want this to be heard. I'm sure that Joe Menzie doesn't want this to be heard, but it's out here now, and it's in our world and it exists. And the minute they start receiving emails and they
Mhm.
start receiving phone calls, the behavior will change.
Mhm.
These people are so worried about their reputations.
Yeah.
The minute it's tarnished or the minute people start questioning them, they'll change their behavior. And it's about awareness
Mhm.
It's about accountability, and it's about changing and reform. And that's really what I'm about, and really what Virginia parents are about. And, these other groups that I'm trying to work with, and Robert Garza and yourself and other people like Carl Roberts. This is
Mhm.
our mission, and our mission is really to protect children.
Yeah, definitely. And people say these judges should be educated, but I think they're educated enough. They just don't care about your kids. They don't like you. They don't like your kids. They like their kids, maybe, but they get to go home to their kids while we don't.
Yeah.
And they follow a false narrative that the other side has thrown out there and it's been run with. And this is a warning to all parents. What happened to you and what happened to me can happen to anybody.
Yeah. I mean, look at your book. I mean, how many examples do we have? And then when I joined Northern Virginia Parents United, I was introduced to, I would say roughly 15 or 20 other parents, husbands and wives, men and women who are dealing with this. An individual who's in Henrico County who's dealing with this same issue right now, false
Mm.
allegations. So it's more prevalent, and I think that reform is needed, and I think that reform will happen because there is momentum, but not to the scale that we really need it to happen.
Right. Abolish it. Right. You know me.
Yeah.
If you want people, I mean, I think.
So once again, I'm not advocating anything, but I will tell you that if you just Google the Doughty Law Firm in Manassas, Virginia, all of the contact information is up there. It's public knowledge.
Right.
It's not me doxing anybody or not me telling anybody to reach out and harass him. Please, nobody harass, but make sure that you know that his actions and behavior, and you're aware of it, and
Hmm.
that you can express your opinion. But I'm not here to dox anyone, but hey, the internet is a wonderful thing.
Hmm.
Google is a wonderful thing. And the Doughty Law Firm is advertising their services. And as an individual, you're just expressing your opinion about their services.
Definitely. And, if you're the one who hires an attorney and goes after someone, that's on you. You don't expect that other party to pay your attorney fees. That is just so unconstitutional.
Well,
That's
there's
on
a
you.
provision. Yeah, there's a provision in the marital separation agreement that if you are lose, that you're responsible for the other person's uh, legal fees. However, in this, and as my lawyer argued, there was no preponderance of guilt, and there was no willingness. So therefore, it doesn't trigger the mechanism that I'm responsible for the legal fees. Once again, Judge Bernhard overstepped his bounds,
Hmm.
used his own personal beliefs to write a draft contempt order that was prejudiced, that was, basically uh, written as punitive, and it showed no clear path for a new type of environment in the best interest of the children.
Hmm.
And that's the end of the day, is the narrative that needs to be put out there. And like I said, the Fairfax County Court is also on the internet, and Judge Bernhard's court clerk can be reached at the number on there, and you can send them an email or give them a call also. And once again, not doxing, not intimidating or harassing, just making people aware that
Hmm.
these officials can be contacted. All you have to do is use the internet.
Hmm. Well, thank you so very much. Hey, how can people reach you if they have any questions?
I mean,
Do you want them to come through me?
yeah, or me, you can happily give them my email. Me, I'm transparent. I
Okay.
don't hide anything, and I will answer anyone's question, respond to email. You're happy if anybody contacts you, give them my email, and they can shoot me an email. And I'm happy to share my phone number and talk to them.
Hmm.
But I really want people to be more involved. And if
Right.
they can help on my case in any way, if there's a lawyer or a law firm out there, a civil rights organization, please help me. I mean, I've been doing this for 3.5 years. My children are suffering,
Mhm.
and we need your help.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for coming on the podcast, and don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. Thank you, James Sisco, for speaking out and warning others. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. I really appreciate the opportunity.